Good evening, everyone. Glad to have you here. Almost overslept for today. I've been sleeping a lot lately, but it's been nice. I've been catching up on some much needed sleep. But I'm glad everyone is here. Let's ship on over to ASMR stream. Last time that we were reading Anna Karenina, we had ended part 3 with a very deep dive into the socio-economic world of Russia and really what the Viz, well, Alexandroviches and the and Levins are having to deal with their own families, which is very interesting. Hopefully, you guys are ready for some more story tonight. You don't really know where the story is going to take us now that we ended that long dive into the socio-economic world of you. But we did end with Levin saying goodbye to his brother. Probably, for what he knows, is for the last time. Now, let's go ahead and rejoin our cast of people in part 4, chapter 1. Joining up with the Karenins. The Karenins, husband and wife, continued living in the same house, met every day, but were complete strangers to one another. Alexei Alexandrovich made it a rule to see his wife every day, so that the servants might have no grounds or for suppositions, but avoided dining at home. Vronsky was never at Alexei Alexandrovich's house, but Anna saw him away from home, and her husband was aware of it. The position was one of misery for all three, and not one of them would have been equal to enduring this position for a single day if it had not been for the expectation that it would change. That it was merely a temporary, painful, or ordeal which would pass over. Alexei Alexandrovich hoped that this passion would pass, as if it does pass, that everyone would forget about it, and his name would remain unsullied. Anna, on whom the position depended, for whom it was miserable, more miserable than for anyone, endured it, because she not merely hoped, but firmly believed that it would all very soon would be settled and come right. She had not the least idea what would settle the position, but she firmly believed that something would turn up very soon. Vronsky, against his own will or wishes, followed her lead, amongst hoped, too, that something, apart from his own action, would be sure to solve all difficulties. In the middle of winter, Vronsky spent a very tiresome week. A foreign prince who had come on a visit to Petersburg was put under his charge, and he had to show him the sights worth seeing. Vronsky was of distinguished appearance. He possessed, moreover, the art of behaving with somewhat respectful dignity. It was very much used to having to do with such grand personages. Also, thank you for the follow, Freshman Thunder 3. Thank you. So glad to have you here. Currently not playing the game, but thank you. We're currently reading through a really nice story. That was how he came to be put in charge of the prince, but he felt his duties were very irksome. The prince was anxious to miss nothing of which he would be asked at home, had he seen that in Russia. And on his own account, he was very anxious to enjoy to the utmost all Russian forms of amusement. Vronsky was obliged to be his guide in satisfying both these inclinations. The mornings they spent driving to look at places of interest. The evenings they passed enjoying the national entertainments. The prince enjoying in health exceptional even among princes. By gymnastics and careful attention to his health, he had brought himself to such a point that in spite of his excess in pleasure, he looked as fresh as a big, glossy, green Dutch cucumber. The prince had traveled a great deal, and considered one of the chief advantages of modern facilities and communications was the accessibility of pleasures of all nations. He had been in Spain, and there had indulged in serenades and made friends with a Spanish girl who played the mandolin. In Switzerland, he had killed catboys. In England, he had galloped in a red coat over hedges and killed 200 pheasants for a bet. In Turkey, he had gone into a harem. He got into a harem. In India, he had hunted on an elephant, and now in Russia, he wished to taste all the specially Russian forms of pleasure. Of all the especially Russian forms of pleasure. Vronsky, who was, as it were, chief master of the ceremonies to him, was at great pains to arrange all the Russian amusements, perhaps suggested by various persons to the prince. They had racehorses, and Russian pancakes, and bear hunts, and three-horse sledges, and gypsies, and drinking feasts, with the Russian accompaniment of broken crockery, and the prince, with surprising ease, fell in with the Russian spirit, smashed trays full of crockery, sat with a gypsy girl on his knee, and seemed to be asking, "What more? What does the Russian spirit consist in all this?" In reality, of all the Russian entertainment, the prince liked best French actresses and ballet dancers and white seal champagne. Vronsky was used to princes, but either because he had himself changed of late, or that he was in too close proximity to the prince, that week seemed fearfully wearisome to him. The whole of the week he experienced a sensation such as a man might set in charge of a dangerous madman, afraid of the madman, and at the same time, from being with him, fearing his own reason. Vronsky was continually conscious of the necessity of never for a second relaxing the tone of stern official respectfulness, that he might not himself be insulted. The prince's manner of treating the very people who, to Vronsky's surprise, were ready to descend to any depths to provide him with Russian amusements, was contemptuous. His criticisms of Russian women, whom he wished to study, more than once made Vronsky crimson with indignation. The chief reason why the prince was so particularly disagreeable to Vronsky was that he could not help seeing himself in him, and what he saw in the mirror did not gratify his self-esteem. He was a very stupid and self-centered and very healthy and very well-washed man, and nothing else. He was a gentleman. This was true, and Vronsky could not deny it. He was equable and not cringing with his superiors, was free and ingratiating in his behavior with his equals, and was contemptuously indulgent with his inferiors. Vronsky was himself the same, and regarded it as a great merit to be so. But for the prince, he was an inferior, and his contemptuous and indulgent attitude to him revolted him. Brainless beef. Can I be like that? He thought. Be that as it may, when on the 7th day he parted from the prince, who was starting from Moscow, and received his thanks, he was happy to be rid of his uncomfortable position and the unpleasant reflection of himself. He said good night to him, and at the station on their return from a bear hunt, at which they had had a display of Russian prowess kept up all night. Chapter 2. I'm gonna take a quick sip of coffee. Chapter 2. When he got home, Francie found there a note from Anna. She wrote, I am ill and unhappy. I cannot come out, but I cannot go on longer without seeing you. Come in this evening. Alexei Alexandrovich goes to the council at 7 and will be there until 10. Thinking for an instant of the strangeness of her bidding him to come straight to her, in spite of her husband's insisting on her not receiving him, he decided to go. Francie had that winter gone. His promotion was now a colonel. Had left the regimental quarters and was living alone. After having some lunch, he lay down on the sofa immediately, and in 5 minutes, memories of the hideous scene he had witnessed during the last few days were confused together and joined on to a mental image of Anna and the peasant who had played an important part in the bear hunt, and Francie fell asleep. He waked up in the dark, trembling with horror and made haste to light a candle. What was it? What was that dreadful thing I dreamed? Yes, I think a dirty little man with a disheveled beard was stooping down, doing something, and all of a sudden he began saying some more strange French words. Yes, there's nothing else in the dream, he said to himself. But why was it so awful? He vividly recalled the peasant again, and those incomprehensible French words the peasant had uttered, and a chill of horror ran down his spine. What nonsense, thought Vronsky, and glanced at his watch. It was 8:30 already. He rang up his servant, dressed in haste, and went out onto the steps, completely forgetting the dream and only worried about being late. As he drove up to the Karenin's entrance, he looked at his watch and saw it was 10 minutes to 9. A high, narrow carriage with a pair of greys was standing at the entrance. He recognized Anna's carriage. She's coming to me, thought Vronsky. And better she should. I don't like going into that house. But no matter, I can't hide myself, he thought. And with the manner peculiar to him from childhood, as of a man who has nothing to be ashamed of, Vronsky got out of his sledge and went to the door. Door opened, and the hall porter with a rug on his arm called the carriage. Vronsky, though he did not usually notice details, noticed at this moment the amazed expression with which the porter glanced at him. In the very doorway, Vronsky almost ran up against Alexei Alexandrovich. Ooh. In the very doorway, Vronsky almost ran up against Alexei Alexandrovich. The gas jet threw its full light onto the bloodless, sunken face under the black hat and on the white cravat, brilliant against the beaver of the coat. Karenin's fixed, dull eyes were fastened upon Vronsky's face. Also, Chaka, thank you so much for the hat pats. Thank you. It's good to see you. Oop, lost my spot. There we go. Karen's fixed, dull eyes were fastened upon Vronsky's face. Vronsky bowed, and Alexei Alexandrovich, chewing his lips, lifted his hand to his hat and went on. Vronsky saw him without looking around, get into the carriage, picked up the rug and the opera glass at the window and disappeared. Vronsky went into the hall. His brows were scowling and his eyes gleamed with a proud and angry light in them. What a position, he thought. If he would fight, would stand up for his honor, I could act, could express my feelings. But this weakness or baseness, he puts me in the position of playing false, which I never mean to do. Vronsky's ideas had changed since the day of his conversation with Anna in the free garden. Unconsciously, yielding to the weakness of Anna, who had surrendered herself up to him utterly, and simply looked to him to decide her fate, ready to submit to anything. He had long ceased to think that their time might end as he had thought then. His ambitious plans had retreated into the background again, and feeling that he had got out of that circle of activity in which everything was definite, he had given himself entirely to his passion, and that passion was binding him more and more closely to her. He was still in the hallway when he caught the sound of her retreating footsteps. He knew she had been expecting him and had listened for him, and was now going back to the drawing room. "No," she cried, on seeing him, and at the first sound of her voice, the tears in her eyes, her tears came into her eyes. "No, if things are to go on like this, the end will come much, much too soon." "What is it, dear one?" "What? I've been waiting in agony for an hour, 2 hours. No, I won't. I can't quarrel with you. Of course you couldn't come. No, I won't," she said. She laid her 2 hands on his shoulders and took a long while at him with a profound, passionate, and at the same time searching look. She was studying his face to make up for the time she had not seen him. She was, every time she saw him, making the picture of him in her imagination, incomparably superior, impossible in reality, fit him as he really was. Chapter 3. "You met him?" she asked, when they had sat down at a table in the lamplight. "You're punished, you see, for being late." "Yes, but how was it? Wasn't he to be at the council?" "He had been, and come back, and was going out again somewhere again." "That's no matter. Don't talk about it. Where have you been?" "With the prince still." She knew every detail of his existence. He was going to say that he had been up all night and had dropped to sleep, but looking at her thrilled and rapturous face, he was ashamed, and he said he had to go to report on the prince's departure. "But it's over now. Is he gone?" "Thank God it's over. You wouldn't believe how insufferable it's been for me." "Why so? Isn't it the life all of you young men always lead?" she said, knitting her brows, and taking up the crochet work that was lying on the table. She began drawing the hook out of it, without looking at Vronsky. "I gave that life up long ago," he said, wondering at the change in her face and trying to divine its meaning. "And I confess," he said, with a smile showing his thick white teeth, "this week I've been, as it were, looking at myself in a glass and seeing that life, and I didn't like it." She held the work in her hands she had not crocheted, and looked at him with strange, shining, and hostile eyes. "This morning, Lisa came to see me. They're not afraid to call on me, in spite of the Countess Lydia Ivanovna," she put in. "And she told me about your Athenian evening. How loathsome." "I was just going to say," she interrupted him, "it was that Teresa you used to know. I was just saying how disgusting you are, you men. How is it you can't understand that a woman can never forget that?" she said, getting more and more angry, and so letting him see the cause of her irritation. "Especially a woman who cannot know your life. What do I know? What have I ever known?" she said. "You tell me, and how do I know whether you tell me the truth?" "Anna, you hurt me. Don't you trust me? Haven't I told you that I haven't thought I wouldn't lay bare to you?" Yes, yes," she said, evidently trying to suppress her jealous thoughts. "But if only you knew how wretched I am. I believe you. I believe you. What were you saying?" But he could not at once recall what he had been going to say. These Fits of jealousy, which of late had been more and more frequent with her, horrified him, and however much he tried to disguise that fact, made him feel cold to her, although he knew the cause of her jealousy was her love for him. How often he had told himself that her love was happiness, and now she loved him as a woman can love when love has outweighed for her all the good things in life, and he was much further from happiness than when he had followed her from Moscow. And he had thought himself unhappy, but happiness was before him. Now, he felt that the best happiness was already left behind. She was utterly unlike what she had been when he first saw her. Both morally and physically, she had changed for the worse. She had broadened out all over, and in her face at the time, when she was speaking of the actress, there was an evil expression of hatred that distorted it. He looked at her as a man looks at a faded flower he has gathered, with difficulty recognizing in it the beauty for which he picked and ruined it. In spite of this, he felt then, when its love was stronger, he could, if he had greatly wished it, have torn that love out of his heart. But now, as at that moment it seemed, to him, he felt no love for her. He knew that what bound him to her, he knew that what bound him to her could not be broken. Well, what is it you were going to say about the prince? I've driven away the fiend, she added. The fiend was the name they'd given her jealousy. What did you begin to tell me about the prince? Why did you find him so tiresome? They named her jealousy the fiend? Gosh. If they even hydrate Shaka, I'll hydrate right meow. I was wondering if he was going to get tired of her, now that he's quote-unquote won. Oh, it was intolerable, he said, trying to pick up the thread of his interrupted thought. He does not improve on closer acquaintance. If you want him defined, here he is, a prime, a well-fed beast, such as takes medals as the cattle shows, and nothing more, he said, with a tone of vexation that interested her. No, how so? She replied. He's seen a great deal, anyway. He's cultured. It's an utterly different culture, their culture. He's cultivated, one sees, simply to be able to despise culture, as they despise everything but animal pleasures. But don't you all care for these animal pleasures, she said, and again he noticed a dark look in her eyes that avoided him. How is it you're defending him? He said, smiling. I'm not defending him, it's nothing to me, but I imagine, if you had not cared for these pleasures yourselves, you might have got out of them. But if it affords you satisfaction to gaze at Therese in the attire of Eve. Again, the devil again, Vronsky said, taking the hand she had laid on the table and kissing it. Yes, but I can't help it. You don't know what I have suffered waiting for you. I believe I'm not jealous. I'm not jealous. I believe you when you're here. But when you're away, somewhere leading your life is so incomprehensible to me. She turned away from him, pulled a hook at last out of the croquet work, and rapidly, with the help of her forefinger, began working loop after loop of the wool that was dazzling white in the lamplight, with the slender wrists moved swiftly, nervously in the embroidered cuff. This is an interesting development. How was it then? Where did you meet? Alexei Alexandrovich, her voice sounded in an unnatural and jarring tone. We ran up against each other in the doorway. And he bowed to you like this? She drew a long face and, half closing her eyes, quickly transformed her expression, folding her hands. And Vronsky suddenly saw in her beautiful face the expression with which Alexei Alexandrovich had bowed to him. He smiled, while she laughed gaily, with a sweet, deep laugh, which was one of her greater charms. I don't understand him in the least, said Vronsky. If after your vow to him at your country house he had broken with you, if you had called me out. But this I can't understand. How can he put up with such a position? He feels it. That's evident. She said sneeringly, he's perfectly satisfied. What are we all miserable for, when everything might be so happy? Only not he. Don't I know him? In the falsity in which he is utterly steeped? Could one, with any feeling, live as he is living with me? He understands nothing and feels nothing. Could a man of any feeling live in the same house with his unfaithful wife? Could he talk to her, call her my dear? And again she could not help mimicking, Anna, ma chérie, Anna, dear. He's not a man, not a human being. He's a doll. No one knows him, but I know him. Oh, if I'd been in his place, I'd long ago have killed. I've torn to pieces a wife like me. I would have said, Anna, ma chérie. He's not a man. He's an official machine. He doesn't understand that I'm your wife, that he's outside, that he's superfluous. Let's talk of him. You're very unfair, dearest, said Vronsky, trying to soothe her. But never mind, don't. Let's talk of him. Tell me, what have you been doing? What's the matter? What has been wrong with you, and what did the doctor say? She looked at him with mocking amusement. Evidently, she had hit on another absurd and grotesque aspect in her husband and was waiting the moment to give expression to them. But he went on. I imagine that it's not an illness, but your condition. When will it be? The ironical light died away in her eyes, but a different smile, a consciousness of something. He did not know what, and a quiet melancholy came over her face. Soon, you say that our position is miserable, but we must put an end to it. If you knew how terrible it is to me, what I would give to be able to love you freely and boldly, I should not torture myself and torture you with my jealousy. And it will come soon, but not as we expect. And at the thought of how it would come, she seemed so pitiable to herself that tears came to her eyes, and she could not go on. She laid her hand on her sleeve, dazzling in white with its rings and lamplight. It won't come as we suppose. I didn't mean to say this to you, but you've made me. Soon, all will be over, and we shall all be at peace and suffer no more. I don't understand, he said, understanding her. I don't understand, he said, understanding her. You asked when. Soon. And I shan't live through it. Don't interrupt me, she made haste to speak. I know it. I know for certain I shall die. And I'm very glad I shall die and release myself in you. Tears dropped from her eyes. He bent down over her hand and began kissing it, trying to hide his emotions, which he knew had no sort of grounds, though he could not control it. Yes, it's better so, she said, tightly gripping his hand. That's the only way. The only way left us. He had recovered himself and lifted his head. How absurd. What absurd nonsense you are talking. No, it's true. What? What's the truth? That I shall die. I have had a dream. A dream? Repeated Vronsky, and instantly he recalled the peasant of his dream. Yes, a dream, she said. It's a long while since I dreamed it. I dreamed that I ran into my bedroom, that I had to get something there, to find something. You know how it is in dreams, she said, her eyes wide with horror. And in the bedroom, in the corner, stood something. What nonsense. How can you believe? But she would not let him interrupt her. What she was saying was too important to her. And the something turned around, and I saw it was a peasant with a disheveled beard, little and dreadful looking. I wanted to run away, but he bent down over a sack and was fumbling with his hands. She showed how he had moved his hands. There was terror in her face. And Vronsky, remembering his dream, felt the same terror filling his soul. He was fumbling and kept talking quickly in French, you know. Il fallait le brater, le faire, le broyer, le petite. And in my horror, I tried to wake up and woke up, but woke up in a dream. And I began asking myself what it meant. And Corny said to me, in childbirth, you'll die, man. You'll die. And I woke up. What nonsense. What nonsense, said Vronsky. But he himself felt that there was no conviction in his voice. Don't let's talk of it. Ring the bell. I'll have tea. And stay a little now. It's not long I shall. But all at once she stopped. The expression of her face instantaneously changed. Horror and excitement were suddenly replaced by a look of soft, solemn, blissful attention. He could not comprehend the meaning of the change. She was listening to the stirring of the new life within her. Is that like confirming that she's pregnant? Chapter 4. Alexei Ostrovich, after meeting Vronsky on his own steps, drove as he had attended to the Italian opera. He sat through 2 acts there and saw everyone he had wanted to see. While returning home, he carefully scrutinized the hat stand and, noticing that there was not a military coat over there, he went, as usual, to his own room. But contrary to his usual habit, he did not go to bed. He walked up and down his study till 3 o'clock in the morning, the feeling of furious anger with his wife, who would not observe the proprieties and keep to the one stipulation he had laid upon her, would not receive her lover in her own home, gave him no peace. She had not complied with his request, and he was bound to punish her and carry out his threat, obtain a divorce, and take away his son. He knew all the difficulties connected with this course, but he had said he would do it, and now he must carry out his threat. Countess Lydia Ivanovna had hinted that this was the best way out of his position, and of the late obtaining of divorces had been brought to such perfection that Alexei Alexandrovich saw a possibility of overcoming the former difficulties. Misfortunes never come singly, and the affairs of a reorganization of the native tribes and the irrigation lands of the Zavarovsky province had brought such official worries upon Alexei Alexandrovich that he had been of late in a continual condition of extreme irritability. He did not sleep the whole night, and his fury, growing in a sort of vast arithmetical progression, reached its highest limits in the morning. He dressed in haste, and as though carrying his cup full of wrath, and fearing to spill any over, fearing to lose his wrath, the energy necessary for the interview with his wife, he went into her room directly he heard she was up. Anna, who had thought she knew her husband so well, was amazed at his appearance when he went in to her. His brow was lowering, his eyes stared darkly before him, avoiding her eyes. His mouth was tightly and contemptuously shut. In his walk, his gesture, in the sound of his voice, there was a determination and firmness such as his wife had never seen in him. He went into her room, and without greeting her, walked straight up to a writing table, and taking her keys, opened a drawer. "What do you want?" "Your lover's letters," she said. "They're not here," she said, shutting the drawer. But from that action he saw he had guessed right, and roughly pushing away her hand, he quickly snatched a portfolio, in which he knew she used to put her most important papers. She tried to pull the portfolio away, but he pushed her back. "Sit down. I have to speak to you," he said, putting the portfolio under his arm and squeezing it so tightly with his elbow that his shoulder stood up. Amazed and intimidated, she gazed at him in silence. "I told you that I would not allow you to receive your lover in this house. I had to see him too." She stopped, not finding a reason. "I do not enter details of why a woman wants to see her lover. I meant I only," she said, flushing hotly. The coarseness of his angered her, and gave her courage. "Surely you must feel how easy it is for you to insult me," she said. "An honest man and an honest woman may be insulted, but to tell a thief that he's a thief is simply la constatation de fait. Cruelty is something new I do not know in you. You call it cruelty for a husband to give his wife liberty, giving her the honorable protection of his name, simply on the condition of observing the properties. Is that cruelty? It's worse than cruel. It's base, if you want to know." Anna cried in a rush of hatred, and getting up she was going away. "No!" he shrieked in his shrill voice, his pitch a whole note higher than usual, and his big hands clutching her by the arm so violently that red marks were left from the bracelet he was squeezing. He forcibly sat her down in her place. "Base, if you care to use that word. What is base to forsake husband and child for a lover while you eat your husband's bread?" She bowed her head. She did not say what she had said the evening before to her lover, that he was her husband, and her husband was superfluous. And she did not even think that. She felt all the justice of his words, and only said softly, "You cannot describe my position as worse than I feel it to be myself. But what are you saying all this for?" "What am I saying it all for? What for?" he went on, as angrily. "That you may know that since you have not carried out my wishes in regard to observing outward decorum, I will take measures to put an end to this state of things. Very soon. Very soon. It will end anyway," she said. And again, at the thought of death near at hand and now desired, tears came to her eyes. "It will end sooner than you and your lover have planned. If you must have the satisfaction of animal passion. Alexei Alexandrovich, I won't say it's not generous, but it's not a gentleman to strike anyone who's down. Yes, you only think of yourself. But the sufferings of a man who was your husband has no interest for you. You don't care that his whole life is ruined, that he is duff. Duff. Alexei Alexandrovich was speaking so quickly that he stammered, and utterly unable to articulate the word suffering. In the end, he pronounced it suffering. She wanted to laugh, and was immediately ashamed that anything could amuse her at that moment. And for the first time, for an instant, she felt for him, put herself in his place, and was sorry for him. But what could she say or do? Her head sank. Her head sank, and she sat silent. He, too, was silent for some time, and then began speaking in a frigid, less shrill voice, emphasizing random words that had no special significance. "I came to tell you," he said. She glanced at him. "No. It was my fancy," she thought, recalling the expression of his face when he stumbled over the word suffering. "No. Can a man with those dull eyes, with that satisfied complacency, feel anything? I cannot change anything," she whispered. "I have come to tell you that I am going to Moscow tomorrow, and I shall not return again to this house, and you will receive notice of what I decide through the lawyer into whose hands I shall entrust the task of getting a divorce. My son is going to my sister's," said Alexei Alexandrovich, with an effort recalling what he had meant to say about his son. "You take Shiroza to hurt me," she said, looking at him from under her brows. "You do not love him. Leave me, Shiroza. Yes, I have lost even my affection for my son, because he's associated with the repulsion I feel for you. But I shall take him. Goodbye." And he was going away, but now she detained him. "Alexei Alexandrovich, leave me, Shiroza," she whispered once more. "I have nothing else to say. Leave Shiroza till I shall soon be confined. Leave him." Alexei Alexandrovich flew into a rage, and snatching his hand from her, he went out of the room without a word. Okay. Chapter 5. The waiting room of the celebrated Petersburg lawyer was full when Alexei Alexandrovich entered it. 3 ladies, an old lady, a young lady, and a merchant's wife, and 3 gentlemen, one a German baker with a ring on his finger, the second a merchant with a beard, and the third a wrathful-looking government clerk in official uniform, with a cross on his neck, had obviously been waiting a long while already. 2 clerks were writing at tables with scratching pens. The appurtenances of the writing tables, with which Alexei Alexandrovich was himself very fastidious, were exceptionally good. He could not help observing this. One of the clerks, without getting up, turned wrathfully to Alexei Alexandrovich, half closing his eyes. "What are you wanting?" He replied that he had to see the lawyer on some business. "He is engaged," the clerk responded severely, and he pointed with his pen at persons waiting and went on writing. Can't he spend time to see me, please?" said Alexei Alexandrovich. "He has no free time. He is always busy. Kindly wait your turn." "Then I must trouble you to give him my card," Alexei Alexandrovich said with dignity, seeing the impossibility of preserving his incognito. The clerk took the card and, obviously not approving of what he read up on it, went to the door. Alexei Alexandrovich was, in principle, in favor of the publicity of legal proceedings, though, for some higher official consideration, he disliked the application of the principle in Russia and disapproved of it, as far as he could disapprove of anything instituted by authority of the emperor. His whole life had been disapproved of it. His whole life has been spent in administrative work, and consequently, when he did not approve anything, his disapproval was softened by the recognition of the inevitability of mistakes and the possibility of reform in every department. In the new public law courts, he disliked the restrictions laid on the lawyers conducting cases. But till then, he had nothing to do with the law courts, and so had disapproved of their publicity simply in theory. Now, his disapprobation was strengthened by the unpleasant impression made on him in the lawyer's waiting room. "Coming immediately," said the clerk, and 2 minutes later did he actually appear in a doorway, the large figure of an old solicitor who had been consulting with the lawyer himself. The lawyer was a little, squat, bald man, with a darkish reddish beard, light-colored long eyebrows, and an overhanging brow. He was attired as though for a wedding, from his cravat to his double-chain watch and varnished boots. His face was clever and manly. His dress was dignified and bad taste. "Pray, walk in," said the lawyer, addressing Alexei Alexandrovich and gloomily ushering Karen before him. He closed the door. "Won't you sit down?" He indicated an armchair at a writing table covered with papers. He sat down himself, and rubbing his little hands with short fingers covered with white hairs, he bent his head to one side. But as soon as he was settled in the position, a moth flew over the table. The lawyer, with a swiftness that could never have been expected of him, opened his hands, caught the moth, and resumed his former attitude. "Before beginning to speak of my business," said Alexei Alexandrovich, following the lawyer's movements and wondering eyes, "I ought to observe that the business about which I have to speak to you is to be strictly private." The lawyer's overhanging reddish mustache was parting in a scarcely perceptible smile. "I should not be a lawyer if I could not keep the secrets confided to me. But if you would like proof—" Alexei Alexandrovich glanced at his hand and saw that the shrewd gray eyes were laughing, and seemingly to know all about it already. "You know my name," Alexei Alexandrovich resumed. "I know you, and the good." Again he caught him off. "What your work, good work you're doing, like every Russian," said the lawyer, bowing. He rests his eyes on Alexei Alexandrovich's feet. Well, there we go. I lost my place for a second. Alexei Alexandrovich sighed, plucking up his courage. Having once made up his mind, he went on in his shrill voice, without timidity or hesitation, extenuating here and there a word. "I have the misfortune," Alexei Alexandrovich began, "to have been deceived in my married life, and I desire to break off all relations with my wife by legal means, that is, to be divorced, but to do this so that my son may not remain with his mother." The lawyer's gray eyes tried not to laugh, but they were dancing with irrepressible glee, and Alexei Alexandrovich saw that it was not simply the delight of a man who has just got a profitable job. There was a triumph and joy. There was a gleam, like the malignant gleam he saw in his wife's eyes. "You desire my assistance in securing the divorce?" Yes, precisely so. But I ought to warn you that I may be wasting your time and attention. I've come to simply consult you as a preliminary step. I want a divorce, but the form in which it is possible is of great consequence to me. It is very possible that if that form does not correspond with my requirements, I may give up legal divorce. Oh, that's always the case, said the lawyer. And that's always for you to decide. He let his eyes rest on Alexei Alexandrovich's feet, feeling that he might offend his client by the sight of his irrepressible amusement. He looked at the moth that flew before his nose and moved his hands, but did not catch it from regard for Alexei Alexandrovich's position. Though, in their general features, our laws on the subject are known to me, pursued Alexei Alexandrovich. I should be glad to have an idea of the forms in which such things are done in practice. You would be glad, the lawyer, without lifting his eyes, responded, adopting with a certain satisfaction the tone of his client's remarks. For me to lay before you all the methods by which you can secure what you desire. Now, receiving an assuring nod from Alexei, he went on, stealing a glance now and then at Alexei Alexandrovich's face, which was glowing red in patches. Divorced by our laws, he said, with a slight shade of disapprobation of our laws. As possible as you are aware, in the following cases, wait a little, he called to a clerk who put his head in at the door, but he got up all the same, said a few words to him, and sat down again. In the following cases, physical defect in the married parties, desertion without communication for 5 years, he said, crooking his short finger toward covered with hair. Adultery, this word he pronounced with obvious satisfaction, subdivided as follows. He continued to crook his fat fingers, although 3 cases and their subdivisions could obviously not be classified together. Physical defect of the husband are the wife. Adultery of the husband are the wife. As by now all his fingers were used up, he uncrooked all his fingers and went on. This is the theoretical view, but I imagine you have done me the honor to apply to me in order to learn its application and practice. And therefore, guided by precedents, must inform you that in practice cases of divorce shall all be reduced in the following. There's no physical defect, I may assume, nor desertion. Alexei Alexandrovich bowed his head in assent. May be required to the following: adultery of one of the married parties, and the detention of the fact of the guilty party by mutual agreement, and failing such agreement, accidental detection. It must be admitted that the latter case is rarely met with in practice, said the lawyer, stealing a glance at Alexei Alexandrovich as he paused, as a man selling pistols, after enlarging on the advantages of each weapon, might await his customer's choice. But Alexei Alexandrovich said nothing, and therefore the lawyer went on. The most usual and sensible course I consider is adultery by mutual consent. I should not permit myself to express it so, speaking with a man of no education, he said. But I imagine that to you this is comprehensible. Alexei Alexandrovich was, however, so perturbed that he did not immediately comprehend all the good sense of adultery by mutual consent, and his eyes expressed the uncertainty. But the lawyer promptly came to his assistance. People cannot go on living together. Here you have a fact. And if both of you are agreed about it, the details of formalities about become a matter of no importance. And at the same time, this is the simplest and most certain method. Alexei Alexandrovich fully understood now, but he had religious scruples which hindered the execution of such a plan. That is out of the question in the present case, he said. Only one alternative is possible. Undesigned detection, supported by letters, which I have. At the mention of letters, the lawyer pursed up his lips and gave utterance to a thin, little, compassionate, and contemptuous sound. Kindly consider, he began. Cases of that kind are, as you are aware, under ecclesiastical jurisdiction. The Reverend Fathers are fond of going into the minutest details of cases of that kind, he said with a smile, which betrayed his sympathy with the Reverend Father's taste. Letters may, of course, be a partial confirmation, but detection in the fact there must be of the most direct kind, that is, by eyewitnesses. In fact, if you do me the honor to entrust your confidence to me, you will do well to leave me the choice of the measures to be employed. If one wants the result, one must admit the means. If it is so, Alexei Alexandrovich began turning white. But at that moment the lawyer rose and again went to the door to speak to the intruding clerk. Tell her we don't haggle over fees, he said, and returned to Alexei Alexandrovich. On his way back, he caught unobserved another moth. Nice state. My rep curtains will be in the summer, he thought, frowning. And so you were saying, I will communicate my decision to you by letter, said Alexei Alexandrovich, getting up and clutched at the table. After standing a moment in silence, he said, From your words, I may consequently conclude that a divorce may be obtained. I would ask you to let me know what are your terms. It may be obtained if you give me complete liberty of action, said the lawyer, not answering his question. When can I reckon on receiving information from you? He asked, moving towards the door, his eyes and his varnished boots shining. In a week's time. Your answer as to whether you will undertake to conduct the case and on what terms you'll be so good as to communicate to me. Very good. The lawyer bowed respectfully, let his client out the door, and left alone, gave himself up to the sense of amusement. He felt so mirthful that, contrary to his rules, he made a reduction in his terms to the haggling lady, and gave up catching moths, finally deciding that next winter he must have the furniture covered with velvet, like Sigonins. Very fun. I'm going to take a really quick sip of my water. We'll keep going. Chapter 6. Alexei Alexandrovich had gained a brilliant victory at the sitting of the commission of the 17th of August. Ooh, that was just a couple of days ago for us. But in the sequel, this victory cut the ground from under his feet. The new commission for this inquiry into the condition of the native tribes in all its branches had been formed, dispatched, in its destination with an unusual speed and energy inspired by Alexei Alexandrovich. With 3 months, a report was presented. The condition of the native tribes was investigated in its political, administrative, economic, ethnographic, material, and religious aspects. To all these questions, which were answers admirably stated, and answers admitting no shade of doubt, since they were not a product of human thought, always liable to error, in that, but were all product of official activity. The answers were all based on the official data furnished by government and heads of churches, and found in the reports of district magistrates and ecclesiastical superintendents, founded in their turn on the reports of parochial overseers and parish priests. And so all these answers were unhesitating and certain. All of which questions asked, for instance, of the cause of failure of crops, of the adherence of certain tribes to their ancient beliefs, questions which, but for the convenient intervention of the official machine, are not, and cannot be solved for ages, received full, unhesitating solution, and the solution was in favor of Alexei Alexandrovich's contention. But Stromov, who had felt stung to the quick at the latest sitting, had, on the reception of the Commission's report, resorted to tactics which Alexei Alexandrovich had not anticipated. Stromov, carrying with him several members, went over to Alexei Alexandrovich's side, and not contenting himself with warmly defending the measure proposed by Karenina, proposed another more extreme measure in the same direction. These measures still further exaggerated in opposition what was Alexei Alexandrovich's fundamental idea, were passed by the Commission, and then the aim of Stromov's tactic became apparent. Carried to an extreme, the measures seemed at once to be so absurd that the highest authorities in public opinion and intellectual ladies and the newspapers all at the same time fell foul of them, expressing their indignation both with the measures and their nominal father, Alexei Alexandrovich. Stromov drew back, affecting to have blindly followed Karenina and to be astounded and distressed as to what had been done. This meant the defeat of Alexei Alexandrovich, but in spite of failing health, in spite of his domestic griefs, he did not give in. There was a split in the Commission. Some members, like Stromov at their head, justified their mistake on the ground that they had put faith in the Commission of Revision instituted by Alexei Alexandrovich, and maintained that the report of the Commission was rubbish and simply was so much raised paper. Alexei Alexandrovich, with following of those, with a following, with the following of those who saw the danger of so revolutionary an attitude to official documents, persisted in upholding the statements obtained by the revising Commission. In consequence of this, in the higher sphere, and even in society, all chaos, and although everyone was interested, no one could tell whether native tribes really were becoming impoverished and ruined, or whether they were in a flourishing condition. The position of Alexei Alexandrovich, owing to this, and partly owing to the contempt lavished on him for his wife's infidelity, became very precarious, and in his position he took an important resolution. To the astonishment of his commission, he announced that he should ask permission to go himself to investigate the question on the spot, and having obtained permission, Alexei Alexandrovich prepared to set off to these remote provinces. Alexei Alexandrovich's departure made a great sensation, the more so as just before he started his official return, the posting fares allowed him for 12 horses to drive to his destination. I think it's very noble, Betsy said about this to Prince Miyakaya. Why take money for posting horses when everyone knows that there are railways everywhere now? The Princess Mayakaya did not agree, and Princess Verskaya's opinion annoyed her indeed. It's all very well for you to talk, said she, when you have I don't know how many millions, but I'm very glad when my husband goes on a revising tour in the summer. It's very good for him and pleasant traveling about, and it's a settled arrangement for me to keep a carriage and coachman on the money. On his way to the remote provinces, Alexei Alexandrovich stopped for 3 days in Moscow. The day after his arrival, he was driving back from calling on the Governor General, and at the crossroads of Gustoy Place, when there were always crowds of carriages and sledges, Alexei Alexandrovich suddenly heard his name called out in such a loud and cheerful voice that he could not help looking around. At the corner of the pavement, in a short, stylish overcoat and low-crowned, fashionable hat, jauntily askew, with a smile that showed a gleam of white teeth and red lips, stood Stepan Arkadyevich, radiant, young, and beaming. He called him vigorously and urgently, and insisted on his stopping. He had one arm on the window of a carriage that was stopping in the corner, and out of the window were thrust the heads of a lady in a velvet hat and two children. Stepan Arkadyevich was smiling and beckoning to his brother-in-law. The lady smiled a kindly smile too, and she too waved her hand at Alexei Alexandrovich. It was Dolly with her children. Alexei Alexandrovich did not want to see anyone in Moscow, and least of all his wife's brother. He raised his hat, and would have driven on, but Stepan Arkadyevich told his coachman to stop, and ran across the snow to him. "Well, what a shame to not have let us know. Been here long? I was at Descente yesterday and saw Karenina on the visitors list, but it never entered my head that was you," said Stepan Arkadyevich, sticking his head in the window of the snow of the carriage. "Or I should have looked you up. I'm glad to see you," he said, knocking one foot against the other to shake the snow off. "What a shame of you not to let us know," he repeated. "I had no time. I am very busy," Alexei Alexandrovich said dryly. "Come to my wife. She does want to see you." Alexei Alexandrovich unfolded the rug in which his frozen feet were wrapped, and getting out of his carriage, made his way over to the snow to Darya Alexandrovna. "Why, Alexei Alexandrovich, what are you cutting us like this for?" said Dolly, smiling. "I was very busy." "Delighted to see you," said, in a tone clearly indicating that he was annoyed by it. "How are you?" "Tell me, how is my darling Anna?" Alexei Alexandrovich, mumbling something that would have gone on, but Stepan Arkadyevich stopped him. "I tell you what we'll do tomorrow. Dolly, ask him to dinner. We'll ask Koznev and Pestov so as to entertain him with our Moscow celebrities." "Yes, please do come. We'll expect you at 5 or 6 o'clock, as if you like. How is my darling Anna? How long?" "She is quite well," Alexei Alexandrovich mumbled, frowning. "Delighted," and he moved toward his carriage. "You will come?" Dolly called after him. Alexei Alexandrovich said something which Dolly could not catch in the noise of the moving carriages. "I shall come round tomorrow," Stepan Arkadyevich shouted to him. "Also, hello, Izzy." Alexei Alexandrovich had gone to his carriage and buried himself in it so as neither to see nor to be seen. "Queer fish," said Stepan Arkadyevich to his wife, and glancing at his watch, he made a motion of his hand before his feet, indicating a caress to his wife and children, and walking jauntily on the pavement. Stiva, Dolly called, reddening. He turned around. "I must get coats, you know, for Grisha and Tanya. Give me the money." "Never mind. You tell him I'll pay the bill." He vanished, nodding gently to the acquaintance who drove by. Sorry, I had a hiccup. And let me take a quick drink of my beverage real fast. Part 4, Chapter 7. The next day was Sunday. Stepan Arkadyevich went to the Grand Theater to rehearsal of the ballet, and gave Masha Chibisova, a pretty dancing girl whom he had just taken under his protection, the coral necklace he had promised her. Oh my God, what a player. Promised her the evening before, and behind the scenes in the dim daylight of the theater, managed to kiss her pretty little face, radiant over her present. Besides, the gifted necklace he wanted to arrange with her before meeting her after the ballet. After explaining that he could not come at the beginning of the ballet, he promised he would come for the last act and take her to supper. From the theater, Stepan Arkadyevich drove to a Hotny Row, selected himself the fish and asparagus for dinner, and by 12 o'clock was at Dussed's, where he would see 3 people, luckily all staying at the same hotel. Levin, who had recently come back from abroad and was staying there, the new head of his department, who had just been promoted to that position, and had come on a tour of his vision to Moscow, and his brother-in-law, Karenin, whom he must see, so as to be sure to bring him to dinner. Stepan Arkadyevich liked dining, but still better he liked to give a dinner, small but very choice, both as regards to food and drink and as regards to the selection of guests. He particularly liked the program of that day's dinner. There would be fresh perch, asparagus, a la piece de resistance, first-rate but quite plain roast beef, and wine to suit. So much for the eating and drinking. Kitty and Levin would be of the party, and that this might not be obtrusively evident, there would be a girl cousin, too, a young Shapatsky, and la piece de resistance among the guests, Sergei Koshinev and Alexei Alexandrovich. Sergei Ivanovich was a Moscow man and a philosopher. Alexei Alexandrovich a Petersburger and a practical politician. He was asking, too, the well-known eccentric enthusiast Estov, a liberal, a great talker, a musician, a historian, and the most delightfully youthful person of 50, who would be a sauce or garnish for Koshinev or Karenin. He would provoke them and set them off. The second installment of the forest had been received from the merchant and was not yet exhausted. Dolly had been very admirable and good-humored of late, and the idea of the dinner pleased Stepan Arkadyevich from every point of view. He was in the most light-hearted mood. There were 2 circumstances, a little unpleasant, but these 2 circumstances were drowned in the sea of good-humored gaiety which flooded the soul of Stepan Arkadyevich. These 2 circumstances were, first, that on meeting Alexei Alexandrovich the day before in the street, he had noticed that he was cold and reserved with him, and putting the expression of Alexei Alexandrovich's face, and the fact that he had not come to see them or let them know of his arrival with the rumors he had heard about Anna and Vronsky, Stepan Arkadyevich guessed that something was wrong between the husband and the wife. That was one disagreeable thing. The other disagreeable fact, was that the new head of his department, like all new heads, had a reputation already of a terrible person who got up at 6 o'clock in the morning, worked like a horse, and insisted on his subordinates working in the same way. Moreover, this new head had the further reputation of being a bear in his manners, and was, according to all reports, a man of a class in all respects the opposite of that to which his predecessor had belonged, and to which Stepan Arkadyevich had hitherto belonged himself. On the previous day, Stepan Arkadyevich had appeared in the office in uniform, and the new chief had been very affable and had talked to him as to an acquaintance. Consequently, Stepan Arkadyevich deemed it his duty to call upon him in his non-official dress. The thought that the new chief might not tender him a warm reception was the other unpleasant thing. But Stepan Arkadyevich instinctively felt that something would come around all right. They're all people, all men, like us poor sinners. Why be nasty and quarrelsome? He thought as he went to the hotel. "Good day, Vasily," he said, walking into the corridor with his hat cocked on one side and addressing a footman he knew. "Why, you've let your whiskers grow. 11, number 7, eh? Take me up, please, and find out whether Count Achubin, that was the new head, is receiving." "Yes, sir." Vasily responded, smiling. You've not seen us for a long while. I was here yesterday, but at the other entrance. Is this number 7? Levin was standing with a peasant from Tavar in the middle of the room, mentioning a fresh bearskin when Stepan Arkadyevich went in. What? You killed him? Cried Stepan Arkadyevich. Well done. A she-bear? How are you, Arp? He shook the hands of the peasant and sat down at the edge of the chair without taking off his coat and hat. Come, take off your coat and stay a little, said Levin, taking his hat. No, I haven't time. I've only looked in for a tiny second, answered Stepan Arkadyevich. He threw open his coat, but afterwards did take it off and sat for a whole hour, talking to Levin about hunting, the most intimate subjects. Come, tell me, please, what did you do abroad? Where have you been? Said Stepan Arkadyevich when the peasant had gone. Oh, I stayed in Germany, and Prussia, and France, and England, not in the capitals, but in the manufacturing towns, and saw a great deal that was new to me, and I'm glad I went. Yes, I knew your idea of the solution of the labor question. Not a bit. In Russia, there is no labor question. In Russia, the question is that of the relation of the working people to the land, though the question exists there too. But there, it's a matter of repairing what's been ruined. While with us, Stepan Arkadyevich listened attentively to Levin. Yes, he said. It's very possible you're right. But I'm glad you're in good spirits and are hunting bears and working and interested. Spatsky told me another story. He met you, that you were in such a depressed state, talking of nothing but death. Well, what of it? I'm not giving up thinking of death, said Levin. It's true that it's high time I was dead, and that all this is nonsense. It's the truth I'm telling you. I do value my idea and my work awfully, but in reality only consider this. All this world of ours is nothing but a speck of mildew, which has grown up on a tiny planet, and for us to suppose we can have something great, ideas, work, it's all dust and ashes. But that's as old as the hills, my boy. It is old, but do you know, when you grasp this fully, that somehow everything becomes of no consequence. When you understand that you will die tomorrow, if not today, and nothing will be left, then everything is so unimportant. And I consider my idea very important, but it turns out really to be as unimportant too, even if it were carried out, as doing for that bear. Someone goes on living, amusing myself with hunting and with work. Everything so as not to think of death. Stepan Arkadyevich smiled a subtle, affectionate smile as he listened to Levin. Well, of course. Here you've come round to my point. Do you remember you attacked me for seeking enjoyment in life? Don't be so severe, oh moralist. No. All the same, what's fine in life is... Levin hesitated. Oh, I don't know. All I know is that we shall soon be dead. Why so soon? And do you know, there's less charm in life when one thinks of death, but there's more peace. On the contrary, the finish is always the best, but I must be going, said Stepan Arkadyevich, getting up for the 10th time. No, oh no, stay a bit, said Levin, keeping him. Now, when shall we see each other again? I'm going tomorrow. I'm a nice person. Why, that's just what I came for. You simply must come to dinner with us today. Your brother's coming, and Karenina, my brother-in-law. You don't mean to say he's here, said Levin. He wanted to inquire about Kitty. He had heard at the beginning of winter that she was at Petersburg with her sister, the wife of the diplomat, and he did not know whether she had come back or not. But he changed his mind and did not ask whether she's coming or not. I don't care, he said to himself. So you'll come? Of course. At 5 o'clock, then, and not evening dress. And Stepan Arkadyevich got up and went down to the new head of his department. Instinct had not misled Stepan Arkadyevich. The terrible new head turned out to be an extremely amiable person, and Stepan Arkadyevich lunched with him and stayed on, so that it was 4 o'clock before he got to Alexei Alexandrovich. Chapter 8. Alexei Alexandrovich, on coming back from church service, had spent the whole morning indoors. He had two pieces of business before him that morning: to receive and send on a deputation from the native tribes which was on its ways to Petersburg and now at Moscow. Secondly, to write the promised letter to the lawyer. The deputation, though it had been summoned at Alexei Alexandrovich's instigation, was not without its discomforting and even dangerous aspect, and even was glad he had found it in Moscow. The members of the deputation had not the slightest conception of their duty and the parts they were to play. They naively believed that it was their business to lay before the commission their need and the actual condition of things, and to ask assistance of the government, and utterly failed to grasp that some of their statements and requests supported the contention of the enemy side, and so spoiled the whole business. Alexei Alexandrovich was busily engaged with them for a long while, drew up a program for them from which they were not to depart, and on dismissing them wrote a letter to Petersburg for the guidance of the deputation. He had his chief support in this affair in the Countess Lydia Ivanovna. She was specialist in the matter of deputations, and no one knew better than she how to manage them and put them in the way she should go. Having completed the task, Alexei Alexandrovich wrote the letter to the lawyer. Without the slightest hesitation, he gave him permission to act as he might judge best. In the letter, he enclosed 3 of Franti's notes to Anna, which were in the portfolio he had taken away. Since Alexei Alexandrovich had left home with the intention of not returning to his family again, and since he had been at the lawyer's and spoken, though only to one man, of his intention, since especially he had translated the matter from the world of real life to the world of ink and paper, he had grown more and more used to his own intention, and by now distinctly perceived the feasibility of his execution. He was sealing the envelope to the lawyer when he heard the loud tones of Stepan Arkadyevich's voice. Stepan Arkadyevich was disputing with Alexei Alexandrovich's servant and insisting on being announced. No matter, thought Alexei Alexandrovich. So much the better. I'll inform him at once of my position in regard to his sister, and explain to him why I can't dine with him. Come in, he said aloud, collecting his papers and putting them in a blotting paper. There, you see, you're talking nonsense. He's at home, responded Stepan Arkadyevich's voice, addressing the servant, who had refused to let him in, and taking off his coat as he went. Oblonsky walked into the room. Well, I'm awfully glad I've found you. So I hope, Stepan Arkadyevich began cheerfully. I cannot come, Alexei Alexandrovich said coldly, standing and not asking the visitor to sit down. Alexei Alexandrovich had thought to pass at once into those frigid relations into which he thought to stand with his brother of a wife against whom he was beginning to sue for divorce, but he had not taken into account the ocean of kindliness brimming over in the heart of Stepan Arkadyevich. Stepan Arkadyevich opened wide his clear, shining eyes. Why can't you? What do you mean? He asked in perplexity, speaking in French. Oh, but it's a promise, and we're all counting on you. I want to tell you that I can't dine at your house because the terms of relationship which have existed between us must cease. What? How? How do you mean? What for? Said Stepan Arkadyevich with a smile. Because I am beginning action for divorce against your sister, my wife. I ought to have. Before Alexei Alexandrovich had time to finish his sentence, Stepan Arkadyevich was behaving not at all as he had expected. He groaned and sank into an armchair. No, Alexei Alexandrovich, what are you saying? Cried Oblonsky, and his suffering was apparent in his face. It is so. Excuse me, I can't believe it. Alexei Alexandrovich sat down, feeling that his words had not um, feeling that his words had not had the effect he anticipated, and that it would be unavoidable for him to explain his action or his position, and that whatever explanations he might make, his relations with his brother-in-law would remain unchanged. Yes, I am brought to the painful necessity of seeking divorce, he said. I will say one thing, Alexei Alexandrovich. I know you for an excellent, upright man. I know Anna, excuse me, I can't change my opinion of her, for a good and excellent woman, and so, excuse me, I cannot believe it. There is some misunderstanding, said he. Oh, if it were merely a misunderstanding. Pardon, I understand, interposed Stepan Arkadyevich, but of course, one thing. You must not hesitate. You must not act in haste. You must not. You must not act in haste. I am not acting in haste, Alexei Alexandrovich said coldly, but one cannot ask advice of anyone in such a matter. I have quite made up my mind. This is awful, said Arkadyevich, Stepan Arkadyevich. I would do one thing, Alexei Alexandrovich. I beseech you, do it, he said. No action has yet been taken, if I understand rightly, but you take advice. See my wife. Talk to her. She loves Anna, like a sister. She loves you, and she's a wonderful woman. For God's sake, talk to her. Do me a favor. I beseech you. Alexei Alexandrovich pondered, and Stepan Alexandrovich looked at him sympathetically without interrupting his silence. Will you go see her? I don't know. That was just why I have not been to see you. I imagine our relations must change. Why so? I don't see that. Allow me to believe that, apart from our connection you have for me, at least in part, the same friend feeling I have always had for you, and sincere esteem, said Stepan Arkadyevich, pressing his hand. Even if your worst suppositions were correct, I don't, and never would, take on myself to judge either side. And I see no reason why our relationship should be affected. But now, do this. Come and see my wife. Well, we look at the matter differently, said Alexei Alexandrovich coldly. However, we won't discuss it. No. Why shouldn't you come today to dine anyway? My wife's expecting you. Please, do come, and above all, talk it over with her. She's such a wonderful woman. For God's sake, on my knees, I implore you. If you so much wish it, I will come, said Alexei Alexandrovich, sighing. And anxious to change the conversation, he inquired about what interests them both. The new head of Stepan Arkadyevich's department, a man not yet old, who had suddenly been promoted to a high position. Alexei Alexandrovich had previously felt no liking for Colt Anichling, and had always differed from him in his opinions. But now, excuse me, okay, apologies. But now, from a feeling readily comprehensible to officials that hatred felt by one who has suffered a defeat in the service for one who has received a promotion, he could not endure him. Well, have you seen him? Said Alexei Alexandrovich with a malignant smile. Of course. He was at our seating yesterday. He seems to know his work capitally, and to be very energetic. Yes, but what is his energy directed to? Said Alexei Alexandrovich. Is he aiming at doing anything, or simply undoing what's been done? It's a great misfortune for government, the paper administration, of which he's a worthy representative. Really, I don't know what fault one could find in him. His policy I don't know, but one thing, he's a very nice fellow, answered Stepan Arkadyevich. I've just been seen with him, and he's a really capital fellow. We lunched together, and I taught him how to make, that drink, wine and oranges. It's so cooling, and it's a wonder he didn't know it. He liked it awfully. No, really, he's a capital fellow. Stepan Arkadyevich glanced at his watch. Why, good heavens, it's 4 already, and I've still to go to Dolgorovichin's, so please come around to dinner. You can't imagine how you will grieve my wife and me. The way in which Alexei Alexandrovich saw his brother-in-law out was very different from the manner in which he had met him. I promise I'll come, he answered wearily. Believe me, I appreciate it, and I hope you won't regret it, answered Stepan Arkadyevich, smiling. And putting on his coat as he went, he patted the footman on the head and chuckled and went out. At 5 o'clock, and not evening dress, please, he shouted once more, turning to the door. Okay. Chapter 9. It was past 5, and several guests had already arrived. Before the host himself got home, he went in together with Sergei Ivanovich, Kashinev, and Bestov, who had reached the street door at the same moment. These were 2 leading representatives of the Moscow intellectuals, as Oblonsky had called them. Both were men respected for their character and intelligence. They respected each other, but were in complete and hopeless disagreement upon every subject. Not because they belonged to opposite parties, but precisely because they were of the same party. I'll have to refund that to you, Choco Chip. I've still not set that redeem up. Although, I admire that you so want to see me in a balloon hat. I'll have to refund that to you a little bit later. In fact, I can probably refund it to you now. There we go. One day we'll actually have that redeemed back up. In fact, it's not supposed to be up. There we go. Usually redeems like that won't be active during ASMR anyway, but I should have checked. Not because they belonged to opposite parties, but because they were of the same party. Their enemies refused to see any distinction between their views, but in that party, each had its own special shade of opinion. And since no difference is less easily overcome than difference of opinion about semi-abstract questions, they never agreed in any opinion, and had long indeed been accustomed to jeer without anger at each other's incorrigible aberrations. They were just going in at the door, talking of the weather, when Stepan Arkadyevich overtook them. In the drawing room, there were already sitting Prince Alexander Dmitri Shabatsky, young Shabatsky, and Tverskin Kitty and Karenin. Stepan Arkadyevich saw immediately that things were not going well in the drawing room without him. Darya Alexandrovna, in her best gray silk gown, obviously worried about the children, who were to have their dinner by themselves in the nursery and by her husband's absence, was not equal to the task of making the party mix without him. All were sitting like so many priests' wives on a visit, as the old prince expressed it, obviously wondering why they were there and pumping up remarks simply to avoid being silent. Vonskin, good simple man, felt unmistakably a fish out of water, and the smile with which his thick lips greeted Stepan Arkadyevich said, as plainly as words, "Well, old boy, you have popped me down in a learned set, a drinking party now, or the Chateau des Fleurs would be more in line." The old prince sat in silence, his bright little eyes watching Karenin from one side, and Stepan Arkadyevich saw that he had already formed a phrase to sum up that politician of whom guests were invited to partake as though he were a surgeon. Kitty was looking at the door, calling up her energies to form her from blushing at the entrance of Konstantin Levin. Young Shtcherbatsky, who had not been introduced to Karenin, was trying to look as though he were not in the least conscious of it. Karenin himself had followed the Petersburg fashion for a dinner with the ladies and was wearing evening dress and a white tie. Ha! He was not to wear an evening dress, I believe. Stepan Arkadyevich, sorry for the loud laughter, by the way. Forgive me. I got excited. I do love writing. Anyway. Stepan Arkadyevich saw by his face that he had come simply to keep his promise and was performing a disagreeable duty in being present at this gathering. He was indeed the person chiefly responsible for the chill and benumbing all the guests before Stepan Arkadyevich came in. On entering the drawing room, Stepan Arkadyevich apologized, explaining that he had been detained by the prince, who was always the scapegoat for all his absences and punctualities, and in one moment he had made all the guests acquainted with one another, and bringing together Alexei Alexandrovich and Sergei Kashinov, started them on a discussion of the Russianification of Poland, into which they immediately plunged with Prestov. Slapping Turovskin on the shoulder, he whispered something comic in his ear, and set him down by his wife and the old prince. Then he told Kitty she was looking very pretty that evening, and sent Shtcherbatsky to Karenin. In a moment he had so kneaded together the social dough that the drawing room became very lively, and there was a merry buzz of voices. Konstantin Levin was the only person who had not arrived. But this is so much better, as going into the dining room, Stepan Arkadyevich found to his horror that the port and sherry had been procured from Dupree and not from Levy, and directing that coachman should be sent off as speedily as possible to Levi's, he was going back to the drawing room. In the dining room, he was met by Konstantin Levin. "I'm not late?" "You can never help being late," said Stepan Arkadyevich, taking his arm. "Have you a lot of people here? Who's here?" asked Levin. There we go. Sorry. "Have you a lot of people here? Who's here?" asked Levin, unable to help blushing as he knocked the snow off his cap with his glove. "All our own set. Kitty's here. Come along. I'll introduce you to Karenin." Stepan Arkadyevich, for all his liberal views, was well aware that to meet Karenin was sure to be felt a flattering distinction, and so treated his best friends to his honor. But at that instant, Konstantin Levin was not in a condition to feel all the gratification of making such an acquaintance. He had not seen Kitty since that miserable evening when he met Vronsky, not counting, that is, the moment when he had a glimpse of her on the high road. He had known, at the bottom of his heart, that he would see her today. But to keep his thoughts free, he had tried to persuade himself that he did not know it. Now When he heard that she was here, he was suddenly conscious of such delight and at the same time of just such dread that his breath failed him and he could not utter what he wanted to say. What is she like? What is she like? Like what she used to be? Or like what she was in the carriage? What if Darya Alexandrovna told the truth? What? Why shouldn't it be the truth? He thought. Oh, please introduce me to Karenina, he brought out with an effort, and with a desperately determined step he walked into the drawing room and beheld her. She was not the same as she used to be, nor was she as she had been in the carriage. She was quite different. She was scared, shy, shamefaced, and still more charming for it. She saw him at the very instant he walked into the room. She had been expecting him. She was delighted, and so confused at her own delight that there was a moment. The moment when he went up to her sister and glanced at her, when she and he and Dolly, who saw it all, thought she would break down and would begin to cry. She crimsoned, turned white, crimsoned again, and grew faint, waiting, quivering lips for him to come to her. He went up to her, bowed, and held out his hand without speaking, except for the slight quiver of her lips and the moisture in the eyes that made them brighter. Her smile was most calm as she said, "How long has it since we've seen each other?" And with a desperate determination she pressed his hand with her cold hand. "You've not seen me, but I've seen you," said Levin, with a radiant smile of happiness. "I saw you when you were driving from a railway station to Gushovo." "When?" she asked, wondering. "You were driving to Gushovo," said Levin, feeling as if he would sob with the rapture that was in his heart. And how dared I associate the thought of anything not innocent with this touchy creature? And yes, I do believe it's true what Darya Alexandrovna told me, he thought. Stepan Arkadyevich took him by the arm and led him away to Karenina. "Let me introduce you," he mentioned their names. "Very glad to meet you again," said Alexei Alexandrovich coldly, shaking hands with Levin. "You're acquainted?" Stepan Arkadyevich asked in surprise. "We spent 3 hours together on the train," said Levin, smiling, "but got out, just as in the masquerade. Quite mystified, at least I was." "Nonsense. Come on, please," said Stepan Arkadyevich, pointing in the direction of the dining room. The men went into the dining room and went up to the table, laid with 6 sorts of spirits and many kinds of cheese, some with little silver spades and some without, caviar, herrings, preserves of various kinds, and plates of slices of French bread. The men stood round the strong-smelling spirits and salt delicacies, and the digestion of the Russification of Poland between Koshnev, Karenin, and Pestov died down in anticipation of dinner. Sergei Ivanovich was unequaled in his skill in winding up the most heated and serious argument by some unexpected pinch of attic salt that changed the disposition of his opponent. He did this now. Sorry, I was clearing my nose. Thank you all for your patience. Let's see, where was I? Here we are. Alexei Alexandrovich had been maintaining that the Russification of Poland could only be accomplished as a result of larger measures which ought to be introduced by the Russian government. Pestov insisted that one country can only absorb another when it is more densely populated. Koshnev admitted both points, but with limitations. As they were going out of the drawing room to conclude the argument, Koshnev said, smiling, "So then, For the rustification of our foreign populations, there is but one method to bring up as many children as one can. My brother and I are terribly in fault, I see. You married men, especially you, Stepan Arkadyevich, are the real patriots. What numbers have you reached? He said, smiling generally as their host and holding out a tiny wine glass to him. Everyone laughed, and Stepan Arkadyevich with particular good humor. Oh, yes, that's the best method, he said, munching cheese and filing the wine glass with a special sort of spirit. The conversation dropped at jest. The cheese is not bad. Shall I give you some? Said the master of the house. Why have you been going for gymnastics again? He asked Levin, pinching his muscle with his left hand. Levin smiled, bent his arm, and under Stepan Arkadyevich's fingers, the muscle swelled up like a sound cheese, hard as a knob of iron, through the fine cloth of the coats. What biceps! A perfect Samson! I imagine great strength is needed for hunting bears, observed Alexei Alexandrovich, who had mischievous notions about the chase. He cut off and spread with cheese a wafer of bread fine as a spiderweb. Levin smiled. Not at all. Quite the contrary. A child can kill a bear. Here you go. Not at all. Quite the contrary. A child can kill a bear, he said, with a slight bow, moving aside for the ladies who were approaching the table. You have killed a bear, I've been told, said Kitty, trying assiduously to catch with her fork a preserved mushroom that would slip away, and seeing the lace quivering over her white arm. Are there bears on your place? She added, turning her charming little head to him and smiling. There was apparently nothing extraordinary in what she said, but with uttering meaning there was for him in every turn of her lips, her eyes, her hands, as she said it. There was an entreaty for forgiveness, and trust in him, and tenderness, soft, timid tenderness, and promise, and hope, and love for him, which he could not but believe in, and choked him with happiness. No. We've been hunting in the Tver province. It was coming back from there I met your bear Frere in the train, or your boy Frere's brother-in-law, he said in a smile. It was an amusing meeting. And he began telling with droll good humor, after not sleeping all night, he said, wearing an old fur-lined, full-skirted coat, gone to Alexei Alexandrovich's compartment. The conductor, forgetting the proverb, would have chucked me on account of my attire, but therefore I began expressing my feelings in elevated language, and you too, he said, addressing Karenina and forgetting his name. At first would have ejected me on the ground of the old coat, but afterwards you took my part, for which I am extremely grateful. The rights of passengers generally choose their seats are too ill-defined, said Alexei Alexandrovich, rubbing the tips of his fingers on his handkerchief. I saw you were in uncertainty about me, said Levin, smiling good-naturedly, but I made haste to plunge into the intellectual conversation to smooth over the facts of my attire, said Ivanovich, while he kept up the conversation with their hostess. Thank you for the hat pats. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you, Chaka. Sergei Ivanovich, while he kept up the conversation with their hostess, had one ear for his brother, and he glanced askance at him. What is the matter with him today? Why such a conquering hero? He thought. He did not know that Levin was feeling as though he had grown wings. Levin knew she was listening to his words, and that she was glad to listen to him, and that this was the only thing that interested him. Not in that room only, but in the whole world there existed for him only himself. With enormously increased importance and dignity, in his own eyes, and he felt himself on a pinnacle that made him giddy. And far away, down below, were all those nice, excellent Karenins, Oblonskys, in all the world. Quite without attracting notice, without glancing at them, as though there were no other places left, Stepan Arkadyevitch put Levin and Kitty side by side. Oh, you may as well sit there. The dinner was as choice as the china, in which Stepan Arkadyevitch was a connoisseur. The soup Maria Louise was a splendid success. The tiny pies eaten with it melted in its mouth and were irreproachable. The two footmen in Matvey in white cravats did their duty with the dishes and wines unobtrusively, quietly, and swiftly. On the material side, the dinner was a success. It was no less on the material. The conversation, at times general and at times between individuals, never paused, and moved towards the end. The company was so lively that the men rose from the table without stopping speaking, and even Alexei Alexandrovich thawed. And Rojo, thank you so much for paying the shiny tax. I'm sorry that you're such an evil bastard. You're in the right place for it, though, because we're doing some bedtime story ASMR reading. So you're in a perfect place. Seeing how many more chapters we have for tonight. Chapter 10. Yes, please avoid that if you can, Rojo. I would appreciate it. Chapter 10. Pesov, like thrashing an argument out to the end. Also, Don, thank you so much for paying the shiny tax. I was not satisfied with Sergei Ivanovitch's words, especially as he felt the injustice of his view. I did not mean, he said over the soup, addressing Alexei Alexandrovich, mere density of population alone, but in conjunction with fundamental ideas, and not by means of principle. It seems to me, Alexei Alexandrovich said languidly with no haze, that that's the same thing, in my opinion. Influence over another people is only possible to the people which has the higher development, which... But that's just the question, Petsov broke in his bass. He was always in a hurry to speak, and seemed to always put his soul into what he was saying. In what are we to make higher development consist? The English, the French, the Germans? What is the highest stage of development? Which of them will nationalize the other? We see the Rhine provinces have been turned French, but the Germans are not at a lower stage, he shouted. There's another law at work there. I fancy the greater influence is always on the side of true civilization, said Alexei Alexandrovich, slightly lifting his eyebrows. But what are we to lay down as outward signs of true civilization, said Pestov. I imagine such signs are generally very well known, said Alexei Alexandrovich. But are they fully known? Are they? I have no clue what these people are talking about right now. Let's see. Sergei Ivanovich put in with a subtle smile. It is the accepted view now that the real culture must be purely classical, but we see most intense disputes on each side of the question. and there's no denying that the opposite camp has strong points in its favor. And I'm just suggesting one thing real fast. Okay. Here we go. You are for classics, Sergei Ivanovich. Will you take red wine? Said Stepan Arkadyevich. I am not expressing my own opinion of either form of culture, Sergei Ivanovich said, holding out his glass with a smile of condescension as to a child. Only say that both sides have strong arguments to support them, he went on, addressing Alexei Alexandrovich. My sympathies are classical from education, but in this discussion I am personally unable to arrive at a conclusion. I see no distinct grounds for classical studies being given a preeminence over scientific studies. The natural sciences have just as great an educational value, put in Pestov. Take astronomy, botany, zoology, with its systems of general principles. I can't quite agree with that, responded Alexei Alexandrovich. It seems to me that one must admit that the very process of studying the forms of language has a peculiarly favorable influence on intellectual development. Moreover, it cannot be denied that the influence of the classical authors is in the highest degree moral, while unfortunately with the study of the natural sciences are associated the false and noxious doctrines which are the curse of our day. Sergei Ivanovich would have said something, but Pestov interrupted him in his rich bass. He began warmly contesting the justice of this view. Sergei Ivanovich waited serenely to speak, obviously with a convincing reply ready. But, said Sergei Ivanovich, smiling subtly and addressing Karenin, one must allow that to weigh all the advantages and disadvantages of classical and scientific studies is a difficult task. And the question which form of education was to be preferred would not have been so quickly and conclusively desired if there had not been in favor of classical education, as you expressed of it just now, its moral disentlement, anti-nihilist influence. Undoubtedly. Thank you for the hydrate, shock. I'll hydrate right now. If it had not been for the distinctive property of anti-nihilistic influence on the side of classical studies, we should have considered the subject more, have weighed the arguments on both sides, said Sergei Ivanovich with a subtle smile. We should have given elbow room to these tendencies. But now we know that these little pills of classical learning possess the medicinal property of anti-nihilism, and we both prescribe them to our patients. But what if they had no such medicinal property? He wound up humorously. At Sergei Ivanovich's little pills, everyone laughed. Turovsky, in his special, roared loudly and jovially, glad at last to have found something to laugh at. All he ever looked for in a listening conversation. Stepan Arkadyevich had not made a mistake in inviting Pestov. With Pestov, intellectual conversation never flagged for an instant. Directly, Sergei Ivanovich had concluded the conversation with his jest. Pestov promptly started a new one. I can't agree even, said he, that the government had that aim. The government obviously is guided by abstract considerations and remains indifferent to the influence its measures may exercise. The education of women, for instance, would naturally be regarded as likely to be harmful, but the government opened schools and universities for women, and the conversation at once passed to the new subject of the education of women. Alexei Alexandrovich expressed the idea that the education of women is apt to be confounded with the emancipation of women, and that it is only so that it can be considered dangerous. I consider, on the contrary, that the two questions are inseparably connected together, said Pestov. It is a vicious circle. Women is deprived of rights and lack of education, and the lack of education results from the absence of rights. We must not forget that the subjugation of women is so complete and dates from ages back that we are often unwilling to recognize the gulf that separates them from us. You said right, said Sergei Ivanovitch, waiting till Pestov had finished, meaning the right of the sitting on juries, of voting, of presiding at official meetings, the right of entering the civil service, of sitting in parliament. Undoubtedly. But if women are a rare exception, can occupy such positions, it seems to me you are wrong in using the expression rights. It would be more correct to say duties. Every man will agree that in doing the duty of a juryman, a witness, a telegraph clerk, we feel we are performing duties, and therefore it would be correct to say that women are seeking duties, and quite legitimately, and one can but sympathize with the desire to assist in the general labor of men. Quite so, Alexei Alexandrovitch insisted. The question, I imagine, is simply whether they are fitted for such duties. They will most likely be perfectly fitted, said Stepan Arkadyevitch, when education has become general among them. We see this. How about the proverb, said the prince, who had long while been intent on this conversation, his little comical eyes twinkling. I could say it for my daughter. Her hair is long because her wit is. Just what they thought of the Negroes before their emancipation, said Pestov angrily. What seems to me is that women should seek fresh duties, said Sergei Ivanovitch, while we see unhappily that men usually try to avoid them. Duties are bound up with rights, power, money, honor. Those are what women are seeking, said Pestov. Just as though I should seek the right to be a wet nurse and feel injured because women are paid for the work, while no one will take me, said the old prince. Tavostin exploded in a loud roar of laughter, and Sergei Ivanovitch regretted that he had not made this comparison. Even Alexei Alexandrovitch smiled. Yes, but a man can't nurse a baby, said Pestov, while a woman. No, there was an Englishman who did suckle his baby on board ship, said the old prince, feeling this freedom in conversation permissible before his own daughters. There are as many such Englishmen as there would be women officials, said Sergei Ivanovitch. Yes, but what is a girl to do who has no family? Put in Stepan Arkadyevitch, thinking of Masha Chibisova, whom he had in his mind all along, and sympathizing with Pestov and supporting him. If the story of such a girl were thoroughly sifted, you would find she had abandoned the family, her own or her sister's, where she might have found a woman's duties. Darya Alexandrovna broke in unexpectedly in a tone of exasperation, probably suspecting what sort of girl Stepan Arkadyevitch was thinking of. But we take our stand on principle as the ideal, replied Pestov in his mellow bass. Women desires to have rights, to be independent, educated. She is oppressed, humiliated by the consciousness of her disabilities. And I'm oppressed and humiliated that they won't engage me at the foundling, said the old prince yet again, to the huge delight of Tavoskin, who, in his mirth, dropped his asparagus with the thick end of the sauce. Chapter 11. Everyone took part in the conversation except Kitty and Levin. At first, when they were talking of the influence that one people has on another, there rose to Levin's mind what he had to say on the subject. But these ideas, what was such importance in his eyes, seemed to come to his brain as in a dream, and had now not the slightest interest for him. It even struck him as strange that they should be so eager to talk of what was of new use to anyone. Kitty, too, should, one would have supposed, have been interested in what they were saying of the rights and education of women. How often she had mused on the subject, thinking of her friend abroad, Veronica, of her painful state of dependence. How often she had wondered about herself, what would become of her if she did not marry, and how often she did argue with her sister about it. But it did not interest her at all. She and Levin had a conversation of their own, yet not a conversation, but some sort of mysterious communication, which brought them every moment nearer and stirred in both a sense of glad terror before the unknown into which they were entering. At first, Levin, in answer to Kitty's question how he could have seen her last year in the carriage, told her he had been coming home from the mowing along the high road and had met her. It was very early in the morning. You were probably only just awake. Your mother was asleep in the corner. It was an exquisite morning. I was walking along, wondering who could it be in the forehand. There was a splendid set of 4 horses with bells. In a second you flashed by, and I saw you at the window. You were sitting like this, holding the strings of your cap with both hands and thinking awfully deep about something, he said. How I should know what you were thinking about. Something important. Was it I dreadfully untidy, she wondered, but seeing the smile of ecstasy, these reminiscences came up. She felt that the impression she had made had been very good. She blushed and laughed with delight. Really, I don't remember. How nicely Tuvovskin laughs, said Levin, admiring his moist and shaking chest. Have you known him long? Oh, everyone knows him. And I see you think he's a horrid man. Not horrid, but nothing in him. Oh, you're wrong. And you must give up thinking so directly, said Kitty. I used to have a very good opinion of him, too, but he's an awfully nice and wonderfully kind, good-hearted man. He has a heart of gold. How could you find out what sort of heart he has? We are great friends. I know him very well. Last year, winter, soon after, you came to see us, she said, with a guilty and at the same time confiding smile. All Dolly's children had scarlet fever, and he had come to see her, and only fancy, she said in a whisper, he felt sorry for her, that he stayed and began to help her look after the children. Yes, and for 3 weeks he stopped with them, and looked after the children like a nurse. I am telling Konstantin Dmitrievich about Tuvovskin and scarlet fever, she said, bending over to her sister. Yes, it was a wonderful, noble, glancing toward Tuvovskin, who had become aware that they were talking of him, and smiling gently to him. Levin glanced once more at Tuvovskin and wondered how it was he had not realized of this man's goodness before. I'm sorry, I'll never think ill of people again, he said gaily, genuinely expressing what he felt at that moment. Gotta take a sip of my drink. Chapter 12, and I believe will be our last chapter of the night. Connected with the conversation that had sprung up on the rights of women, there were certain questions as to inequality of rights in the marriage. Sorry. There were certain questions as to the inequalities of rights in marriage prior to the discussion before the ladies. Pestov had several times during dinner touched upon these questions, but Sergei Ivanovich and Stepan Arkadyevich carefully drew him off them. When they rose from the table and the ladies had gone out, Pestov did not follow them, but addressing Alexei Alexandrovich, began to expound the chief ground of inequality. The inequality in marriage, in his opinion, lay in the fact that the infidelity of the wife and the infidelity of the husband are punished unequally, both by the law and by the public opinion. Stepan Arkadyevich went hurriedly up to Alexei Alexandrovich and offered him a cigar. "No, I don't smoke," Alexei Alexandrovich answered calmly, and as though purposely wishing to know that he was not afraid of the subject, he turned to Pestov with a chilly smile. "I imagine that such a view has a foundation in the very nature of things," he said, and would have gone to the drawing room, but at this point Tavasin broke suddenly and unexpectedly into the conversation, addressing Alexei Alexandrovich. "You heard, perhaps, about Prachnikov? Prachnikov, said Tavasin, warmed up by the champagne he had drunk, and long waiting for an opportunity to break the silence that weighed on him. "Verzya Pyachnikov," he said. He said with a good-natured smile on his damp red lips, addressing himself principally to the most important guest, Alexei Alexandrovich. "They told me today he fought in a duel with Kvitsky at Tver and has killed him." Just as it always seemed that one bruises oneself on a sore place, so Stepan Arkadyevich felt now that the conversation would, by ill luck, fall every moment on Alexei Alexandrovich's sore spot. He would again have got his brother-in-law away, but Alexei Alexandrovich himself inquired with curiosity, "What did Pirachnikov fight about?" "His wife. Acted like a man, he did. Called him out and shot him." "Ah," said Alexei Alexandrovich indifferently, and lifting his eyebrows, he went into the drawing room. "How glad I am you have come," Dolly said with a frightened smile, meeting him in the outer room. "I must talk to you. Let's sit here." Alexei Alexandrovich, with the same expression of indifference given him by his lifted eyebrows, sat down beside Darya Alexandrovna and smiled affectedly. "It's fortunate," said he, "especially as I was meaning to ask you to excuse me and to be taking leave. I have to start tomorrow." Darya Alexandrovna was firmly convinced of Anna's innocence, and she felt herself growing pale and her lips quivering with anger at this frigid, unfeeling man, who was so calmly intending to ruin her innocent friend. "Alexei Alexandrovich," she said, with desperate resolution, looking him in the face, "I asked you about Anna. You made me answer no. You made me no answer. How is she?" "She is, I believe, quite well, Darya Alexandrovna," replied Alexei Alexandrovich, not looking at her. "Alexei Alexandrovich, forgive me, I have no right, but I love Anna as a sister and esteem her. I beg, I beseech you, to tell me what is wrong between you. What fault did you find in her?" Alexei Alexandrovich frowned, and almost closing his eyes, drooped his head. "I presume that your husband has told you the grounds on which I consider it necessary to change my attitude to Anna Arkadyevna," he said, not looking her in the face, but eyeing with displeasure Shabatsky, who was walking across the drawing room. "I don't believe it. I don't believe it. I don't believe it," Dolly said, clasping her bony hands before her with a vigorous gesture. She rose quickly and laid her hand on Alexei Alexandrovich's sleeve. "We shall be disturbed here. Come this way, please." Dolly's agitation had an effect on Alexei Alexandrovich. He got up and submissively followed her to the schoolroom. They sat down to a table covered with oilcloth cut in slits by penknives. I don't believe it," Dolly said, trying to catch his glance that avoided her. "One cannot disbelieve facts, Darya Alexandrovna," he said, with an emphasis on the words facts. "But what has she done?" said Darya Alexandrovna. "What precisely has she done?" She has forsaken her duty and deceived her husband. That's what she has done, said he. No, no, it can't be. No, for God's sake, you must be mistaken, said Dolly, putting her hands to her temples and closing her eyes. Alexei Alexandrovich smiled coldly, with his lips alone, meaning to signify to her and to himself the firmness of his conviction, but this warm defense, though it could not shake him, reopened his wound. He began to speak with greater heat. It is extremely difficult to be mistaken when a wife herself informs her husband of the fact, informs him that 8 years of her life and a son, all that's a mistake, and that she wants to be in life again, he said angrily, with a snort. Anna and sin. I cannot connect them. I can't believe it. Darya Alexandrovna, he said, now looking straight into Dolly's kindly troubled face, and feeling that his tongue was being loosened in spite of himself. I would give a great deal for doubt to be still possible. When I doubted, I was miserable, but it is better than now. When I doubted, I had hope, but now there is no hope, and still I doubt of everything. I was in such doubt of everything that I even hate my son, and sometimes do not believe he is my son. I am very unhappy. He had no need to say that. Darya Alexandrovna had seen that as soon as he glanced into her face. She felt sorry for him, and her faith in the innocence of her friend began to totter. Oh, this is awful, awful. But can it be true that you are resolved on a divorce? I am resolved on extreme measures. There is nothing else for me to do. Nothing else to do. Nothing else to do, she replied with tears in her eyes. Oh no, don't say nothing else to do, she said. What is horrible in a trouble of this kind is that one cannot, as in any other, in loss and death, bear one's trouble in peace, but that one must act, said he, as though guessing her thought. One must get out of the humiliating position in which one is placed. One can't live a Troy. I understand. I quite understand that, said Dolly, and her head sank. She was silent for a little, thinking of herself, of her own grief and her family, and all at once, with an impulsive movement, she raised her head and clasped her hands with an imploring gesture. But wait a little. You're a Christian. Think of her. What will become of her if you cast her off? I have thought, Darya Alexandrovna. I have thought a great deal, said Alexei Alexandrovich. His face turned red in patches, and his dim eyes looked straight before him. Darya Alexandrovna at that moment pitied him with all her heart. That was what I did indeed when she made herself known to me, my humiliation. I left everything as of old. I gave her a chance to reform. I tried to save her. And with what result? She would not regard the slightest request that she should observe a decorum, he said, getting heated. One may save anyone who does not want to be ruined. But if the whole nature is corrupt, so depraved that ruin itself seems to be her salvation, what's to be done? Anything, only not divorce. But what is anything? No, it is awful. She'll be no one's wife. She'll be lost. What can I do? Said Alexei Alexandrovich, raising his shoulders and his eyebrows. The recollection of his wife's last act had so incensed him that he had become frigid. As at the beginning of the conversation, I am very grateful for your sympathy, but I must be going, he said, getting up. No, wait a minute. You must not ruin her. Wait a little. I will tell you about myself. I was married, and my husband deceived me. In anger and jealousy, I would have given up everything. I would myself. But I came to myself again, and who did it? Anna saved me. And here I am living on. Children are growing up. My husband has come back to his family, and feels his fault is growing purer, better, and I live on. I've forgiven him, and you ought to forgive. Alexei Alexandrovich heard her, but her words had no effect on him now. All the hatred of that day, when he had resolved on a divorce, had sprung up again in his soul. He shook himself and said in a shrill voice, Forgive, I cannot. I do not wish to, and I regard it as wrong. I have done everything for this woman, and she has trodden it all in the mud to which she is akin. I am not a spiteful man. I have never hated anyone, but I hate her with my whole soul, and I cannot even forgive her, because I hate her too much for all the wrong she has done me, he said, with tones of hatred in his voice. Love those that hate you, Daria Alexandrovna whispered timorously. Alexei Alexandrovich smiled contemptuously, that he knew long ago, but it could not be applied to his case. Love those that hate you, but to love those one hates is impossible. Forgive me for having troubled you. Everyone has enough to bear in his own grief. And regaining his self-possession, Alexei Alexandrovich quietly took his leave and went away. I'm trying to decide. I feel like that's a really good place to stop for the night. Yeah, because the next 3 chapters are about Levin and Kitty. So I think that'd be a really good place to start off for when we come back next week. Let me just get back to where I was in this chapter. There we go. We got a chapter 13 tonight. I think that's a really good place to stop, actually. So, we'll return to reading Anna Karenina next week at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Tuesday, as we've been going. And I'll be back tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time with Love and Deep Space, because we did not do any Love and Deep Space this past Monday because I kind of slept in. But that's okay. We'll be back on tomorrow with some Love and Deep Space bonus hour. Okay? So don't miss me too much. I'll miss you guys. But until then, please sleep well. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me today. And really, dude, thank you so much for keeping me company. I feel like that's a really good place for us to end off. We went through basically 13 chapters tonight, which is pretty good for us, because we did just get started on part 4. So, thank you all for keeping me company. I will see you all tomorrow, and have a great night. Bye.